All righty, thank you, Dana. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth day of DCA's annual fall conference. My name is Tanya Curtin-Curry, and I'm Deputy Commissioner for Housing here at DCA. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. Again, this is our planning and zoning for affordable housing session, and I'm just going to give a few housekeeping tips before we get started. One of the most important things before we get started is to please, we're asking everyone to keep their phones muted during the presentations. Our presenters, of course, can keep their mics open, but please mute your mics and particularly if you're on the phone. If you have any questions during the session, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll address question and answers at the end. But if there's anything other technology or anything related, we'll try to address those directly to you. Otherwise, there will be an opportunity for you to add your questions or type in your questions in the chat session. This session will be recorded and it'll be available after the conference, so you can share it with others or others in your local governments or your communities will be able to view it after today if they were unable to attend. You also will receive an evaluation immediately following the presentation, and it will be emailed to you. We really appreciate your completing this evaluation because we do value your feedback. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get started. It looks like we have over 80 attendees and climbing, and I will go ahead and give a brief introduction of our presenters. Dana, if you could go ahead and advance to our presentation. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. All right, our panelists for today, we have three distinguished panelists today, and I'm going to give a brief introduction because I'm sure many of you probably already know them or have had a chance to hear from them on other panels. Our first panelist is Dave Dixon. He is the Senior Managing Partner of One Street Residential. And since founding the One Street's Atlanta office in 1998, Dave has actively managed the firm's development of more than 7,000 residential units of new residential construction across the Southeast. Dave, we're happy to have you with us today. Our next presenter will be Bill Gross. He is the owner and president of W.H. Gross Construction Company, which is a commercial construction and development company in Georgia and Florida. Bill is dedicated to the well-being of the growth of Kingsland, Camden County, and the entire coastal Georgia area, and he also has done a great deal of work throughout the state of Georgia. Our third presenter for this afternoon, and you'll see him there on the screen, is Austin Hackney. He is the Government Affairs Director for the Home Builders Association of Georgia. And Austin has served in that role for over 7 years. He is also the chairman of the Georgia Capital Real Estate Trade Group, which is a coalition of advocates for the real estate industry at the Georgia General Assembly. I'm excited to hear from these panelists today. And so if we could advance the slide, Dave will kick us off.
Great. Tanya, thank you very much. Thank you for that great introduction. I'm delighted to be here today. We wanted to, Bill Gross and I have talked a good bit about what we want to accomplish today. I think we want to just start off and talk a little bit about what the housing tax credit program is, how housing tax credits are able to create affordable housing. It is the foremost tool for creating new affordable housing in the country today. And I think sometimes there's misperceptions about what it is. I know many of you have utilized the program or been involved with the program, but I find it helps a little bit to understand exactly how it works. So we've created a quick slide. I'll try not to get into too much detail. Next slide, please. We have the next, there we go. What I wanted to do was to find a way to illustrate when we talk about housing tax credits, the tax credit program itself is not really a subsidy, and it's doesn't create subsidized housing, which is one of the misperceptions we often find. This slide that we're looking at looks at an actual development that we are in the process of building right now, Main Street Walton Mill in Monroe, and it looks at the capital stack for that project, and it compares it to a hypothetical conventional capital stack. And for those of you unfamiliar with the term, the capital stack just means the sources of funds that go into paying for the cost of a construction of a property. And if you look at the affordable capital stack, which is the actual capital stack or the financing for Main Street Walton Mill, it's a 74 unit seniors development. It's mixed income. 19% of the units are market rate, and that means they have unrestricted rents. You'll see that really the tax credit program attacks the issue of affordability by lowering the costs to capital investors and to lenders. And that's the really sum total of the subsidy. And so what you have here in Main Street Walton Mill, you can see that of the total cost, which is just under $17 million, only 23% of that has to be paid with loan. And the loan here is $3,750,000. And the rest, 77% of the cost of this project is paid for with equity. And that equity is provided by investors, private capital, but their total return is really from the tax credits. So they get a flow of tax credits for 10 years. And what that means is that those credits constitute the investor's total return. They do not require any debt service or no mortgage or no interest payments or no return other than the credits. And so you'll see on the right-hand column here, there's a rent required to pay. So only $216 a month is required to pay the debt. Just as a side note, one of the other benefits here is that the Department of Community Affairs was able to provide a home loan that's at lower interest rates for the debt, and another way to kind of lower the debt service and capital costs. And so the total interest rate here is a little over 3%. But the big number is zero. No rent is required to pay 77% of the capital here. Every lender requires there be a little margin of net operating income to pay the debt. So that's what the $54 is. So you have a total capital requirement on a monthly basis, contributes to rent. We only have to have $270 a month to pay our lender and investor. And in addition to that, $516 a month is for operating expenses and reserves. And that gives us an average rent at Main Street Walton Mill of $786, which is very affordable. That includes an average, including the market rate rents, which are unrestricted. A quick comparison, you'll see where the subsidies are. If we finance that same project at the same cost, the exact same development cost, and you'll see at the bottom, the operating expenses are still, that we need to pay per month would be the same, $516 a month. That the real difference is we have a much larger debt, a large mortgage loan that would require $892 a month. And then our private sector investors need a cash return, and that requires $330 a month. So the difference here is $1,969 is the rent. So as you can see, we really get almost a $1,200 rent discount that we can offer to folks who need affordable housing. A couple of other things to mention. Most of you again know this, but the tax credits in return for getting this favorable financing require ownership and maintenance of this as these investments as affordable housing for 15 to 30 years. And they get regular inspections by the Department of Community Affairs for quality. So really what you have is a development that's at or above the quality of conventional properties. That makes some really great long-term investments. And if some of you may have seen older, even tax credit financed properties, what I will say is that Department of Community Affairs has been increasing the quality standards for these developments, so that now I think they're really at or above conventional market rate standards. Next slide. What we're hoping to do today is give you some ideas for how you can incorporate housing tax credit financed affordable housing in your community and economic development plans, and your revitalization plans, and your redevelopment plans. It really is a very highly flexible tool. And so a lot of times I think people have in mind affordable housing as some apartment community somewhere that is just low rent, and nothing really could be further from the truth. So we'll walk through some examples today. I'm going to try to be brief going forward here, but just to give you some ideas of the kinds of things that we'd like to just generate some ideas and some creative thinking as you think about how you want to develop your plan for your community, for redevelopment, community revitalization, downtown development, how affordable housing can be a tool to help you do that. So a few of the ideas here: mixed income. You can mix easily residents who can pay a market rent with people who need affordable rent. This is a really good tool. It changes, in our opinion, and we kind of focus on this, the perception of the property. Mixed tenancy, it is becoming increasingly common, and we'll talk about some of this in a few minutes, to mix for rent and for sale in a master plan community. So these are not diametrically opposed, and often we're finding that the affordable housing is so high quality that it actually stimulates and can help for sale housing development. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, that what we've seen is that in many cases, if the affordable housing is done right and thoughtfully and creatively, it actually raises property values for the single family homes in the neighborhood. It can also be a part of mixed use developments. And one of the things that is increasingly happening is that it's developed in mixed densities, so that you have big buildings and single family and cottages together in the same master plan. You can create urban streetscapes to create a sense of place, and this is possible even in smaller communities or suburban settings. One of the things that we've been really promoting, and honestly haven't done this yet, but we've been trying to find, we think this will work, is ground floor or commercial office space in the ground floor of a large building. At the bottom of this slide, you'll actually see the white building with a dark gray bottom floor is a property we built in Johns Creek. It's conventionally financed, but it's a good example of what we think you can do. That's 1,200 square feet of it's a small retail restaurant. You can also redevelop old properties, abandoned schools, blighted retail. We'll talk in a minute about an old mill that we've been able to redevelop in partnership with the city and some local property owners. The other thing that has been a great tool is for cities can partner with housing authorities for community development, and tax allocation districts are increasingly used. We'll talk about an example in a minute, to really sometimes they can lower the operating costs or allow, most importantly, offsite infrastructure costs that support the affordable housing. Next slide, please. Next slide. This slide shows Hearthside Lafayette, which is a property we developed. It's mixed income, financed with housing tax credits. We have a large component of market rate rents here with unrestricted incomes. And actually, we've been able to achieve above market rents for market rate units, that really higher rents than we have for an adjacent brand new multifamily property. But all that has been made possible by the fact that the city of Fayetteville adopted a tax allocation district many years ago, actually, and they were looking for the right kind of development to utilize that. This was the first property that actually utilized that tax allocation district that the city had sponsored. And what it did here, and you can see this is the aerial shot of the building, it actually allowed us to create or complete infrastructure for a master plan that had been on the books just 2 blocks away from the core of downtown. So it's in their Main Street overlay, and it allowed us to create an infrastructure as well as to create these a substantial component of market rate homes in the building. Next slide, please. One of the first mixed use and mixed tenure communities we developed, we put together in partnership with the Housing Authority of DeKalb County, which is an authority that's really moved out of public housing into affordable housing development and community development. This was a 55-acre public housing development in DeKalb County in what is now Brookhaven. And in partnership with the authority, we have 3 affordable properties. The 2 properties in the foreground here off on the left are both affordable seniors, and the property at the furthest distance in this photo to the right is also a mixed income seniors community. But here we have luxury multifamily. We have upscale retail with places, restaurants like Pure Taqueria and Marlowe's Tavern, as well as very expensive townhomes and single family. And this was done with, you can see to the right, we put a slide in here of Hearthside Brookley. The middle picture on the right is a streetscape. It's a mid-rise building, and we created a streetscape. And really, here we have tax exemptions that were provided by the Housing Authority Partnership that let us put in parks and a rich mix of urban streetscapes that gives us, I think, really a sense of place here. Next slide. This is Main Street Walton Mill. This is in the city of Monroe. We were able to develop this. This is under construction. We were able to develop this because the city had put a significant number of years into planning for downtown redevelopment. They had created a plan, and they had built streetscapes and street improvements down to the site, which is in the old mill district. They have two old mills that they had targeted as kind of focal points for redevelopment. And one of the leading families in town had purchased this old mill and had begun to redevelop it as mixed use. We convinced that owner that affordable housing would be a good component to help with their mixed use plans. They became convinced of that. The city, through their Downtown Development Authority, and they were members of the GIC program. So they had been doing some housing planning for years, and they actually had essentially a competition for the best affordable housing idea. We were fortunate enough to be selected, and this is a mixed income community. This is Main Street Walton Mill, which we showed the how tax credit works, the numbers on earlier today. Next slide, please. This is a community that we are really privileged to develop with the city of Jonesboro. And again, this is an example of a community that just put years into a creative step-by-step plan to redevelop and revitalize their downtown. They've made tremendous progress, and we worked with them for really a couple of years to try to find the right location to blend in with their economic downtown and housing development plans. And one of the things that they wanted to do, they want to drive new home development. They want to drive downtown Jonesboro as a destination for people to live and work and play with vibrant restaurants and entertainment spots. But they want to do that while they drive quality and home prices. They also want to be sure they don't gentrify the neighborhood and drive working folks and lower income people out of their downtown. So they have put together a comprehensive plan, and in partnership with the city, we were also able to bring in Habitat for Humanity, the local chapter there, who is going to be a partner in this development. And with the proceeds they earn from this development, they will do renovations and rehabilitations in the target neighborhoods. And the city is also working with them to provide other land that Habitat will build on. And this is an example of, in the photos here, of what we call mixed density. And you notice we have a big building at the core of this plan, but this is adjacent to an historic, really wonderful residential neighborhood. And so the appropriate thing to do here was to build some cottages. The photo in the upper right-hand corner is a photograph of another community we've developed up in Brazelton, similar with mixed densities. Next slide, please. This is some photographs of, or some renderings really, of two properties that we are very fortunate and excited about developing with the Housing Authority of Lawrenceville. And this is an example, again, where years of work and partnership went into creating a very vibrant cooperative partnership between the city and the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority, the Lawrenceville Housing Authority, has really been on the path of being a catalyst for community development, for housing development in the city, way beyond its public housing portfolio. And it's now working with the city in a position to redevelop its public housing, develop mixed income housing as it expands into this greater community development role. So we've partnered with the Housing Authority and the city to develop 2 properties here. And this rendering is an example again of mixed density. We're also doing mixed income, and this is in kind of partnership or part of a larger strategy by the city, where it again wants to raise the quality of housing, the housing prices, but they all want to do that in the context of preserving affordability. And so I think that probably concludes my time, Tanya.
Yes, and Dave, thank you so much for that overview of the housing tax credit process and for those great examples. We're going to segue now into some additional case studies and examples, and we'll hear now from Bill Gross, and you can go ahead and advance the slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Curry. My name is Bill Gross. I'm in the very southeastern portion of Georgia, and today I want to showcase a development we did in Brunswick, and it was a great project. I know that Dave is focused mainly on the metro projects in and around Atlanta, and the project that we have here is in a MSA, but it's a small MSA, Brunswick, Georgia, and they were struggling with how to redevelop the city. So about 12 or 13 years ago, the city of Brunswick, they recognized, or 15 years ago, they recognized that they needed to have a change because the interstate had bypassed, the traffic was not going through Brunswick anymore, and they had to do something. They had sites scattered all over town that were blighted, and so they took their comprehensive plan and did I call it a plan on steroids, but it was called Blueprint Brunswick. And what they did is they identified about 6 sites in and around Brunswick that were old schools, there were old bus barns, there were old industrial areas, and they said, we've got to do something with these sites. And so they had focus groups with community leaders and neighborhoods, and they got the mindset that they were going to make a change. And so the Blueprint Brunswick site, one of the sites that was on that was an old school called the C.B. Greer Elementary that had been vacant for 10 or 15 years. Graffiti was rampant. The city was spending a lot of money just trying to keep it clean and probably paying the insurances on it. And so they came up with an RFP to put out to developers to come and do something with this site. And so I was awarded the proposal to do it. My presentation included community meetings, of which it was to really tell the community and educate the community on what was going to go there. And if we did this and did a good job, that it would be a catalyst. Okay, so these sites that were on the Blueprint Brunswick were referred to as catalyst sites. And the lingo started within the city, the staff with the elected officials and with residents, where focus was put on these sites that, hey, if we can collectively make something happen, then the community's going to win. So the slide that you see today is this is the development. Next slide. I just want to kind of roll through these and get to the map, just so you can kind of see the before and after. It was an old school. The city was spending a lot of money on the maintenance of it. They'd done some trading on properties with the school board. This is with an obsolete school. The next slide, please. You can see where we did an adaptive reuse from the gymnasium before and after, turned into a great community building. We provided a space for the police. They needed a police presence in that area of town. This is in the North Street corridor, which has gone through a whole redevelopment in itself, but this was the catalyst for that entire corridor. Next slide, please. You can kind of see where the old school was, and now the new development. It was a city block, and this is where I want to kind of give you how the deal worked. So part of the RFP process was to come up with ideas and how can we make this a win-win for everybody. So part of the application that we had, and we had a memorandum with the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority, that the money that we paid for the property that they would take and use it, spend it exclusively on basically a 10-block area in and around this site. So they were able to improve sidewalk, lighting, landscaping, and really that was the genesis for the whole Norwood Street corridor, which was one of the busy business corridors in Brunswick back in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So, you know, it turned out to be a phenomenal development. It's amazing how many people come by the development from St. Simons. They say, hey, would you come and do this on St. Simons? It's made such an impact to this area. We just want market rate, but they're so impressed with it. So the city, hats off that they took the time to collectively come up with a plan, and they've worked the plan. So it's taken a piece of property that was costing the city $20,000 to $30,000 a year or more. It's turned it into a property tax generating property, and it has enhanced multiple blocks in and around and inspired people to invest and reinvest in their homes, and it's really made a terrific change. So I wanted to be quick, just tell you a little bit about the process, how we worked hand in glove with the city. In fact, it took a couple of years to do this. One of the things that I highlight when I talk to cities and communities is the first year we did the application was denied by the DCA because there were so many undesirables on Norwood Street in the surrounding area. So I took that feedback back to the city. I said, guys, if we're going to try this again, then we need to, you guys have got to aggressively get on the cleanup program and help these businesses. You know, we've got company coming to town. We need to clean house. And so the city did a great job in working with folks, getting rid of most of the undesirables, so that a year later we looked good with our application. But I guess you know, the takeaway from this is that you have to have a plan. Cities have to have a plan. They have to be receptive, and they have to work the plan. And I'm proud to say that I was awarded another catalyst site in Brunswick through the RFP process, and we're doing another development there now. So that's my presentation. Next slide, and I'll show you the City of Brunswick map. That was the Blueprint Brunswick. The next slide is the map that they had in Blueprint Brunswick, and you can see that they had catalyst sites around the entire downtown, and even within downtown. So it was important for them to have an aggressive plan, and they were very deliberate in their identifying the catalyst sites, but they were flexible in receiving ideas. And so hats off to them. They've done a phenomenal job, and trying to spark and inspire and use the tax credit developments as a redevelopment tool. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Tanya, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I've just been talking. I was just saying, Bill, thank you so much for your presentation and for those details on how that development worked and the catalyst projects that you're working on in the coastal Georgia region. We're now going to hear from Austin Hackney, who's going to give us kind of a statewide perspective and the home builders perspective. And Austin, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, and we can go ahead and advance the slide. There you
Great.
go.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Curry. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here and join these panelists and address these virtual attendees. It's always great to be back working with friends and former colleagues at the Department of Community Affairs. So if you'll take me to my next slide, I'll tell you just a little bit about the Home Builders Association of Georgia. We're not just residential contractors. We represent the whole industry, which is nearly 3,500 member companies, over 24 local home builders associations around the state. So if you'll take me to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about what I do. My main function as the Government Affairs Director, as you can imagine, is interfacing with the legislative and executive branch of Georgia's government. Our Georgia General Assembly with 236 legislators, part-time legislators, only 4 of them are home builders. So I'm there during session and outside of session to be a resource about our industry and not just affordable housing, but I'm going to get into the distinction with the affordability of housing. If you'll take us to the next slide, it's not just the legislature, but the executive branch too, and all the regulatory issues that we work with through there, including at the Department of Community Affairs. Next slide. I want to tell you about our issues. Why do we work with the government like this and spend so much time and resources with advocacy? And it's really because we're such a highly regulated industry. If you wanted to make a living as a home builder, you need a state license. For that state license, you got to prove that you've had 2 years of experience, completed 2 projects in that time, that you've got a net worth of at least $25,000. You've got a line of credit from your bank in a similar amount. You've got a surety bond in a similar amount. You've got at least $300,000 in liability insurance and workers' comp. And you've got to pass 2 exams, one about the state's construction codes and another about Georgia's business laws. So, and that's just to get your foot in the door. If you want to develop a piece of raw land into a buildable lot, then you've got to get permits from federal, state, and local governments, and that can be very costly and time consuming. And then if you want to build a house on that new lot, you're going to have to do the same thing, get those permits and follow the state minimum standard codes, which are mandatory statewide, even if your local community doesn't have a building inspections department. So next slide, please. Our number one issue, as you can imagine, is the cost of additional government regulations. These stats are from our National Association of Home Builders, so you may be able to reduce those monetary numbers a little bit to get Georgia specific, and I'll get a little bit deeper into that. But basically, how do we talk about this issue at the legislature and with all of our state and local government partners? Well, one way was working with Representative Vance Smith as he chaired the Georgia House Study Committee on Workforce Housing. And I'd like to take a couple minutes to just share some highlights from that study committee, which took place in 2019 and was really a fact-finding mission from the House of Representatives at the state capitol to learn more about workforce housing and what issues there are, why we need it, what barriers exist. And so to do that, the study committee invited speakers from across the state, and those included the Habitat for Humanity, the Atlanta Regional Commission, the Department of Economic Development, Georgia Power, the Apartment Association, the Council for Quality Growth, the mortgage bankers, ACCG and GMA, the Georgia Planning Association. We even heard from Deputy Commissioner Curry and some of her colleagues at the Department of Community Affairs. And so that study committee produced a final report. It's available online, and I'll make sure that a link to that is available with the slides that come out of this. But I wanted to take just a few minutes to highlight some of the things that we learned and the whole, what we try and advocate for at the state capitol, in addition to more opportunities for affordable housing, is more opportunities for market rate housing to be affordable for Georgians. And so those are some of the highlights that I want to bring to you today. And I'll start where we started in the study committee, which was hearing from Habitat for Humanity about why home ownership is important for the people of Georgia. And, I think all of us who live in a house know that's important, but sometimes you don't think about kind of the bigger picture perspective of what that means for our whole society. So the Habitat guys asked, the families that they help obtain these affordable home ownership opportunities about, what happens after you become a homeowner. 90% of those noticed a positive change in their kids' study habits. 60% say they're more confident that they'll be able to send their children to college. 43% have started or completed higher education or training programs. More than 80% feel more financially secure than before. 74% are better able to save money. 71% are better able to pay bills on time. And this is my favorite on the list. Nearly 70% of those who receive public assistance have reduced or eliminated their need for it after becoming a homeowner. So that's why homeownership is important for the people of Georgia. Why is it important for Georgia's economy? Well, the Department of Economic Development told us at one of the study committee meetings that in fiscal year 19, that they had helped facilitate 28,000 new jobs through 566 active projects across the state, which is great news. And we know from our side that for every 2 new jobs created in Georgia, 1 new housing unit is required. And so to attract the talent and the workforce that we need, we've got to have appropriately priced housing to meet what those industries are paying. And so that's why workforce housing is critical to economic growth, but also a healthy residential construction industry has a huge impact on the whole state of Georgia. For example, in 2018, over 40,000 single-family home building permits were pulled statewide. And we can see the 1-year economic impact of those 40,000 new homes includes $11.5 billion in income for Georgians, $1.5 billion in taxes and revenue for local governments, and over 160,000 jobs. So you can see why home ownership and housing is important to Georgia's economy. Let me tell you just for a second about the current status of Georgia's housing market. Georgia has a shortage of at least 350,000 new housing units. Today's housing market, the issues are with supply, not demand. Since 2007, 75% of the building industry has evaporated. People who were building houses at the height of the market left the industry during the recession and just never came back. And so, with that kind of concentration, we've seen since 2011 to 2018, from that time period, the average single-family home sales price in Georgia jumped from $162,000 to $301,000, which is an increase of just over 85%. Affordability in Metro Atlanta is starting to erode. In 2017, 31% of all households were cost burdened or spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And in the 5-year period between 2011 and 2016, the Metro Atlanta region saw a 10% growth in wages, but a 48% increase in rents. And the ability of the average American to qualify for a mortgage is also fragile. And forgive me for these national numbers, but for every $1,000 increase in the price of a home, about 127,000 American households are priced out and unable to meet the mortgage requirements. We know it takes an income of about $27,500 a year to purchase a $100,000 home. Now, those $100,000 homes are kind of hard to find, especially in Metro Atlanta, and we know that the average price house in Georgia is $301,000. So with that easy math, you need at least $82,000 a year in income to be able to qualify for that mortgage for your $300,000 house. Another thing that the study committee studied was the barriers to workforce housing in Georgia. What's standing in the way? In our industry, we're able to categorize those into 4 L's: the labor, land, lumber, and laws. So the first L of labor, the construction industry labor market has always been tight, especially in the past few years. The average age of a construction worker in Metro Atlanta is 45. And of course, at the Home Builders Association and other industry associations, We're doing a lot for workforce development through our technical schools and high schools, but there's a lot of things that need to be made up there as labor costs rise. And the next L, land. Land costs have skyrocketed in Metro Atlanta, as you probably already know. For example, in the 6 months between June 2018 and December 2018, the average lot price in Cherokee County increased from $66,000 to $95,000 in the 6-month period, which is about 44%. Lumber refers to the cost of all building materials, but specifically lumber, since mid-April this year, has risen 170%, which we're told adds $16,000 to the price of a new home. So if you are a spec builder or a custom builder, then you've lost some money on that increase in materials prices that's just happened in the last few months. If you are building subdivisions, or if you're developing lots in a subdivision, you're all of a sudden not hearing from as many builders who want to buy that lot and build a new house. And so those are the kinds of issues that compound through the different layers of residential development. The last L, or laws or land use regulations, you've got those stats up on the screen right now. I'll add that over that same time period, 2011 to 2016, disposable income per capita only increased by 14%. So you see, housing costs go up by almost 30%, but the money to pay for that, is not necessarily related to that increase. I will give one example of that law category that we talked about in the study committee, which are locally enforced residential design standard ordinances. You may know them as replacement requirements on single family homes for exterior colors or style of roofs, or location and styling of windows and doors and garage doors, even building techniques. Home builders report compliance with these zoning conditions can add $10,000 or $20,000 or even $30,000 to the price of a new home. I'll give you a specific example. For an average 27,000 square foot 2-story house in Atlanta, requiring a homeowner to build with a brick exterior rather than a vinyl exterior, because the neighbors or the city government thinks that looks better, actually costs the homeowner at least an extra $12,000 on their new home. So that's just one example. We hear those kinds of examples all over the state where these types of residential design standards are being enforced. And in the study committee itself, we did hear a defense of residential design standards from the city and county representatives who were there. They protect the investments of owners and residents. They could be a marketing tool to sell more properties. They could offer a higher quality of life. And from our perspective, I would just argue that developers are maybe in a better position to understand the local residential real estate market. One example of that are in home sales in Bryan County, which has prohibited vinyl siding as exterior cladding. Since 2009, the average annual appreciation of a home with vinyl siding has appreciated at 3.3%, where a home with a brick exterior has appreciated at 2.3% over the same time period. And I look at that as a function of the market in that area just being more responsive to a lower priced house. And so those are the kinds of things that we see as barriers to affordable market rate houses in Georgia. There are plenty of state programs that we heard from Deputy Commissioner on at one of those study committee hearings. And we've already heard about the low income housing tax credit here, but there are many others like the Community Home Investment Program, the Georgia Dream Home Ownership Program, Home Safe Georgia, the Georgia Initiative for Community Housing, and the State Codes Advisory Committee. And so those are the kinds of things that the Home Builders Association interacts with our state government about. We're obviously more focused on the affordability of market rate housing, but we want to be here as a resource just to help all of our local and state decision makers know more about the effects that these kind of decisions have on home ownership across the state. So I'll conclude there, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent, excellent. Austin, thank you so much. Dana, if you could advance this slide, I think, oh, all right, great. We're at the end here. So we've reached the point, before we take some questions and answers, I really wanted to thank our presenters, Dave, Bill, and Austin, for their perspectives. We tried to have a balance of affordable housing across the state and home ownership in general. And so you all really provided a great perspective and certainly a starting point for additional conversations. At this point, let's see if we have some specific questions. I see some thank yous and a couple of questions just to me directly, but if anyone has any questions for the presenters, please feel free to unmute yourself or to type your message. Oh, here's one. Let's see. The question is, some cities and states are removing exclusively single-family zones. What are the panelists' thoughts on those policies? That's from one of our attendees. And gentlemen, you all may be able to see that in the chat. I don't know if our LIHTC developers have necessarily perspective from the multifamily side. Austin, have you heard that or have any thoughts on that? Oh, you may be on mute, Austin.
Yeah, thank you. We know that at least 89% of all residential land in North Metro Atlanta is zoned exclusively for single family. So, you know, that kind of monoculture really limits growth. Domination of a single demographic can strain the tax base, can stunt employment, puts pressure on public service delivery. So I'll tell you, from our perspective, we'd love to see more of that missing middle of the housing market. Those kind of small scale multifamily developments get placed into more single family zoned areas. You know, a lot of our kind of historic areas that already happens, right? You've got the big Victorian house that's now 4 condo units, and so that's a great way to achieve some density without, you know, building big scale multifamily developments.
Very good. Great point. Great point.
Tanya, this is Bill.
Yes.
I think from a rural perspective, I think that cities are more open-minded today to bringing retail and single family together in some of the downtown districts. They're trying to figure out ways to revitalize these districts and corridors and their downtowns. And one way they're able to do that is to be flexible and to they're open to ideas that they wouldn't have been open to maybe 20 years ago. So converting some of these old buildings into residences and lofts and apartments and mixed use. So I think there's some good concepts that are taking root even in the rural settings.
Very good. I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we certainly appreciate everyone's attendance today. I think I don't see any additional questions. Let me just scroll down and make sure. Nothing yet, but we certainly appreciate the participation of our panelists today and all of those who were able to tune in for this particular session. I believe we have a couple of more sessions this afternoon, so please be sure you are able to connect if you have time or if your schedules allow. All of this material will be available following the virtual conference, and it will be available for you to reshow and to share within your jurisdictions and your communities. So please do not hesitate to reach out to the Department of Community Affairs or to any of our panelists today if you have questions or anything to follow up on. And thank you so much. Dana, I think we've completed this session.
Okay, good deal.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Great job,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Enjoyed it.
Great job, y'all. Great job.